So my talk today is about the ways in which I have found dashboards to be useful in my outreach work at UNH Cooperative Extension. And I could not have given this presentation last year at all. And I'll talk a little bit about how different things are now for me in my job than they were even at last NEARC. So as we all know, I don't know if everybody hasn't seen this dashboard yet, but as COVID started to become the news item, dashboards also rose to prominence. If you were at NEARC last year, we had some of the folks from Johns Hopkins on talking about their dashboard. And I could be wrong, but I think they said they got trillions of hits on, and it doesn't mean it was this dashboard, but they were talking about a scale of use of this technology that was previously unimaginable. And as I sat by myself in my office at home for the past year and a half, really, since I didn't teach students directly, they didn't want me to be on campus. So first time I went back to UNH since March of 2020 was about 3 weeks ago. And so I really changed quite a bit of what I was doing. And I spent a lot of time in the past teaching people how to use maps and GIS and thinking what could be used and how. And it turned very quickly into how can I help people inside our own organization make maps that matter. And so the interesting question to me was, what problems do dashboards solve? I know now how important some of these maps that we were creating that didn't previously exist. I also know this technology, dashboards is out there, but the shiny object problem, as Tim already mentioned, can be a real difficulty, especially once you peel back the layers and start to look at all of the behind the scenes of what makes something really work the way you want it to. So this conversation will be about three problems or three situations that I found that I was encountering and how I use dashboards to be the solution that worked for me in order to accomplish the things I needed to accomplish in those cases. So I'm just going to do the structured presentation, and then, as I said, we have times if people want to see them, explore them, even see behind the scenes, we can. All right. So I was brave enough, I guess, last year to offer a workshop on dashboards on Wednesday morning. And now, considering how little I knew at that point, it seems to me to even be more ridiculous that I decided to do it. But I wasn't sure if it would be useful or if even anybody would attend. And it turned out, I don't know if it was 65 or 70 people attended. And I found it, exciting to think, all right, well, dashboards are cool, but I'm also in a situation with a lot of other people. They're not really sure exactly how they want to use them. They know about them, but maybe next year I might have some examples, tangible examples of how I use them to solve certain issues. So these are the three different topics I'm going to talk about. One is food access, availability of food to people who really need to have access to food, who don't otherwise. My real training in academia is not in GIS, it's in limnology, lake ecology, and cyanobacteria, which is a harmful bacteria that grows in lakes. So there's a project I'm involved with that. And also recently, including actually yesterday, I'm working on this statewide BioBlitz project with other people in cooperative extension in New Hampshire, and dashboards have allowed us to share information in a way that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So in each of these cases, I'm going to do a little thumbnail of what the background is, example of what was the way to do it, and then showing how the dashboards I created are in use in those cases. So food access. I mean, this was something that I knew about, but the amount that I've learned in the past year and a half has been tremendous. This was in March of 2020, I sent an extension-wide email out and said, listen, I know not all of you know me. I know you hear me babbling about story maps quite often. How can we use maps now to help extension do its job better? There must be ways. And one of the first persons to reach out to me said, we would like to make maps of food pantries across the state and have information about how people can access food and also the changes that are happening because of COVID-19. because both people who normally rely on this resource need to be up to date on the changes. And there are people, because of what's happening, that for the first time ever in their lives are going to need access to this food. And we'd like them to have an easy way to be able to find it. So anybody who saw my presentation last year at NEARC, that's what the presentation was all about. So I'm not going into all the behind the scenes, but what resulted was this map, which is, as mentioned earlier, a story map that has tabs. Why? Because people love the tabs. So this is a classic story map. I built this back in, let's see, April of 2020. And this required me to learn quite a bit. Even just figuring out how to make those nice buttons that are different colors. They have rollover effects. There's a variety of things that I was trying to make the story map within my capabilities work in the best way that I could. But there were some limitations, especially when it came to letting people zoom to specific locations and also let people apply multiple filters at once. Like the story map allowed me to kind of have 1.5 filters. So you could choose pantries, meals, and then say, where's pickup places for prepared food? But you couldn't say where are places that both allow you to pick up prepared food and deliver food. Because if you want to know behind the scenes of this, there was one map that had like 4,000 layers on it, and all these buttons just turn on and off individual layers. So this one seemed prime for me to try to see, could dashboards do this better than what I was able to do for this map? So there's been a lot of work on this in extension, even other people embracing it, learning how to use maps, story maps. But what we've come up with for the moment looks very similar, but in some ways is quite different, having the main interface of the food access be based on a map dashboard. And so this is one of the first dashboards that I worked on. And some of the key features about this dashboard, of course, the interactivity and the idea that you can display a lot of information at once on the map was really key. So if you've used dashboards, you know, or if you don't, this is to let you know, there's this element in it called lists. And it allows you to display a lot of information at once in a list on the screen. And part of the reason this was useful is people said to me, oh, you mean I have to click on every point to see the information for each point? And GIS users, yeah, you want to know about a point, you click on it. But people really wanted to have all the information visible at once on the map. Another thing people wanted to be able to do is zoom to a certain location and have only the information about that location visible on the map as well. And that is one of the powerful things about dashboards, is you can have the ability to click on a location, choose a town from a list, and then zoom directly down to that town and have the lists be updated with only the information that's currently visible on the map. In addition to that, instead of just having Shane's a bizarre series of filters on an ArcGIS map in the background, you can let people choose their own combination. So you can have filters where you would say, hey, I want food discounts and I want sites that offer SNAP EBT or a specific type of discount or with veteran discounts. And you don't have to know every single combination of filters and create the layers. You can let people create their own set of filters with the things that they're the most interested in. So while this example of a dashboard isn't the most complex dashboard, it definitely solved that problem of letting people create their own combinations, zoom directly to the area of interest, and just having all the basic information available right there on the screen for them to look at. And it wasn't just our people who are using the map, but even other extension people that sighed, oh, thank goodness, I just want to have a list that I can show people. I don't want to have to spend 20 hours clicking on each point on the map to try to figure out what works best for me. So there's been lots of other continuation of this, including ArcGIS Hub. We are working with folks to do some usability and user testing and interviews with people about how they're using this or not. So I can't wait, once that's all done, to find out how useful this is and changes that we could make that would better suit the needs of folks. And of course, keeping in mind that you don't want people to have to spend a lot of time figuring out how to use this. You want them to be able to get in, get the information they need without it being a struggle or having them have any GIS experience at all. So that is one application of dashboards for a specific topic. And those filters, as I said, letting people choose the filters, choose the information they're interested in seeing is key. And dashboards, better than almost any other application I could think of or know how to use, did that and quite easily, actually. Another part of my life, the people that work with me, called The Secret Life of Shane, because I just think of me of the guy who teaches people how to make maps, is dealing with the problem of cyanobacteria, which is a harmful bacteria that live in lakes, they can bloom, they live in rivers, these are mostly freshwater. They can be unsightly and they can cause smells, but they also produce toxins, which can hurt people. And quite a bit of my graduate work and even some of my work in my job is focused on how do you communicate about these problems? How do you let people understand and monitor and manage them? And so there was an app designed by the EPA in a regional entity that would take the information that people see, they could put it on their phone, take a picture, send it up, and send it to a database. And the database was in a website called citsci.org. So the app directly connects to it. The problem with that is that the database itself was not functioning well. Very often the data wouldn't be submitted, the pictures wouldn't work, and also their ability to display the information was not great. So this is sort of what the data looked like when you went and saw it. Well, one of the things I've done over the past year is work with the app developer, and instead of having the data sent to citsci.org, it actually comes into the UNH Cooperative Extension ArcGIS Online account. The app is sending it directly to our account, and I've designed a dashboard which will then let people view the data. And when people submit it, it shows up right here on this dashboard. So there's a bunch of different things about this dashboard that were different, and even some new tools that hadn't existed before that I decided to use. One is this idea that some elements in a dashboard are only populated once something else is telling them that they need to display information. And we've all used mapping websites that are kind of, you're wondering what to do, and wouldn't it be nice if there were directions or instructions right in front of your face that would tell you how to use this? But right here, this element says, click on a report to display associated photos and notes. And so until you do something, nothing shows up in this space. But once you do click on one of the reports, then the photos or comments show up in this space. So the idea that you can have this notes and then only have it show up once you've clicked here, solve the problem of how do you display all the photos of all the points at once, but also allowed me to have a little set of directions right here that if you read it, click on a report. Okay, you can go ahead and you can click over there. Some of the other things that I've learned with dashboards myself is something called Arcade. And probably people have heard of the idea of Arcade. I was very resistant, as Tim described, a little bubble of all these different technologies. I finally had to give in and figure out how to use some Arcade because it allows you to do certain things. One example is here. The fact that the bloom reported, it says bloom reported and is colored a certain way, and the bloom observed, no bloom observed is a different color. And the fact that it says sort of the size of the bloom up here when there is a bloom and nothing when there's not, was done using Arcade. Did it take me a while to figure out? Yes, it did. Could I teach other people how to do it fairly quickly if that's what they wanted to do? Yes. And I think that this is one of those changes in life that's happened because of COVID, is that I've been able to make and share a lot of maps, but so much of my time has been learning how to do it that I haven't really been teaching other folks. And so hopefully soon I will be able to start teaching other people how to do this and not just figuring it out as I go along myself. I think I promised at NEARC last year that I'd be teaching soon a dashboard workshop, which has not happened. So I'm glad to see at least Katie's interested in learning more about that. The other thing that's important to know too is that dashboards on a mobile device do not look good, or the same dashboard that looks good on a computer does not look good on a mobile device. But I had always looked for a reason to use Experience Builder. And if people don't know about Experience Builder, one of the cool things about it is that it's basically a package, right? So I use that story map tab interface as a package to put information in. Well, I've used an Experience Builder to be the package of this dashboard. And when the experience builder detects it's on a smaller device, it doesn't show this dashboard, it shows this one. So after I created a dashboard that worked well for a larger screen, I also saved as and spent maybe about half an hour coming up with a version that would work better on a mobile device. So you do have to rethink how it looks. So for example, this relies on tabs. You have the map of the reports on an individual tab. You can't see the report count there. And you have the list. Also, where are all the filters? There's not enough screen real estate to put filters like bloom, extent, surface, dates. So those are all contained instead in this little side panel. So you have to rethink how to do it. It doesn't look exactly the same, but the functionality is largely the same. And so you can get all the information that's on that main dashboard, but you have to think about how it works best on a mobile device. And so part of the difficult part is you do have to think carefully about what could work best. But unlike a lot of other apps where it happens, right? A story map, it does what it does on a mobile device. You don't have control over it. Because of that experience builder idea, the experience builder sees what size screen you're on and decides which dashboard to show. And so then you're able to get by the limitation in the dashboard, which is if you take the same dashboard and scrunch it onto a mobile device, it basically becomes unusable. So now almost every dashboard I create, I wrap it in Experience Builder, even if it's just to be able to say, hey, people, when you go to this size screen, don't show this version of the dashboard, show a different one. Seems like a lot of additional work. It's maybe at most like an hour at most of additional work, and it makes it much more accessible. The good thing, or hopefully you're very far down the line, you don't want to do this too early because you don't want to spend a ton of time redoing this dashboard with every change you make in the other. And then recently, and this has been the past few weeks, including one that I'm going to show you, which isn't even live yet, but should go live tomorrow or Tuesday, is this statewide BioBlitz that happened through Cooperative Extension. So Cooperative Extension had a grant to work with some local communities across the state to have BioBlitzes, to bring people out in the field to explore town lands, and they had this whole plan about how to do it. And then COVID happened, where made big gatherings of people not the greatest thing. So they decided to pivot and see what could they do virtually. And they got in touch with me and said, well, how can we use mapping both to help people to find their town lands, which is a whole different dashboard I'm not even going to focus on, but also then once we get the information, how can we share it with people? Because BioBlitzes of having people out, taking pictures, submitting data is nice, but then the question is, well, so what? How do people look at or experience the data? And so if you use iNaturalist, which is what we use for the BioBlitz, which many people use for the BioBlitz, you know, it doesn't do a terrible job of displaying the data, but this is the sort of information that you get. And it's very focused on, all right, let's look at one sighting at a time, or you can see like the rankings of which person made the most observations, but really getting in and filtering and looking at the data interactively is not really the strength of iNaturalist. So what I did periodically, and I actually trained somebody else in Extension how to download and update this. So once I set it up, I didn't actually have to do it. And if I was fancier, I would have come up with an automated way using some sort of Jupyter notebooks or APIs, but I just didn't have the time for it. So there was a few-minute process every day where somebody went in, downloaded the latest version of the iNaturalist data for that project, and then uploaded it into an ArcGIS Online account. And it kept this going as a running update. And part of the idea was to maybe inspire people and to say, hey, you know, how many towns is your town on the list? Or here's the latest information. So this has no map in it at all. And it is important, just like story maps can have no maps, right? Dashboards can have no maps too. And this is very much sort of infographic-like, right? But that's what they wanted. Here, we want to just have people give an idea how many towns participated, like who's participating, what counties are they in. And so many of these features are interactive. These are not, because I could not get a good way to do it in ArcGIS Online. So I would take an extra few minutes each day and do a quick analysis in ArcGIS Pro and then publish the data layer to make these update. But everything else is clickable. So if you click on, you want to know how many fungi were found in Cheshire County, It shows you, you know, the number. It also updates these over here, this nice scroll of pictures that you can scroll up and down. And the little tiny bits of info that are interesting here is because iNaturalist provides the URL directly to the image, this works wonderfully. It's great. And it pulls that image in because it's hosted. No storage costs, Paula. It's hosted already at iNaturalist. Their database, when you download it, it just has the direct URL to the image and you can bring it in nicely. The other thing I used Arcade to do was to make sure that the colors were all in sync. So it actually is colored orange, both the name, the common name, and it says fungi in front of it. If you look back here, you can see that the ones that say plant, or the ones that have plant in front of it, and they're different colors. So I have to say, how I learned to use Arcade in that previous dashboard was copy and paste in order to use it in this one. And the funny thing is they told me to make a dashboard without a map. We don't need a map. We want to inspire people. And now that it's over, we want a map because towns want to be able to see their data, especially Nashua, who, by the way, hung up signs with QR codes at their parks telling people to participate in it. And that was one of the submissions to iNaturalist, was a picture of the signs that they had posted. And so the newest version, which is not even out yet, but will be Monday or Tuesday, they're sending around as a final result, looks more like this, and it does have a map with all of the data. So the towns that are colored in slightly are the towns that had at least one observation. The points are colored, and now this town list over here on the left is actually clickable and usable and updatable, because I did a quick operation in ArcGIS Pro after the fact to add the town name to the column in the data. So now that this is final, you click on any of these towns, like Bow, for example, and it zooms directly down to Bow, and it shows only the data that were collected inside the town of Bow. So both the numbers over there on the left and also the observations on the map are filtered by that. So it'll be interesting to see how people use it, if they use it. I know Nashua already asked for their data. There's just all different ways to think about, once you have information, how can you turn it around and make it usable to people, and also make it so that they don't have to feel as if they need to be a GIS expert in order to use it. So there are others I could do. There are many more. I now consider myself semi-competent in this, where when I gave that presentation last year in the workshop, I just had only scratched the surface. As we talked about, there's always more to learn, but I really, both in my job and especially with the use of this technology, I've tried to focus on, like, how do I take what we have, how do we apply it in a way that then creates something useful to people, especially people who don't have any GIS experience and probably won't pay attention long enough to even have the training that would be required. Can we present something, the information, turn it around, make it available in a way that would be useful? And these are all different ways in which I found Dashboard to be the item that I knew about that did the thing that I needed to do at the moment. So I can put up the links to all of those. I have them. I'll stop sharing my screen. And then if I can find how to stop sharing my screen, let's see, where am I? Oh, here it is. Nope. Oh boy. Darn it. Can somebody stop my screen sharing? Thank you. All right, so Zoom lasted just long enough for me to do that. I'm going to quit and come right back in for any questions people have.
And we can still, is he already gone? While we're waiting for Shane, how many people have used dashboards before? A lot of people had experience with them already.
Okay, I'm back. So you can, did you have a question?
Hey, Shane. Right. I just asked the group while we were waiting for you to see who has used dashboards before. got a couple yeses, a couple nos.
Yeah. Well, I just really feel like they solved the big problem that they solved was how do you make the data interactive? How do you let people make choices and see the results? And how do you guide them to getting the information that they need? And I just found as much as I bent over backwards with that story map, and it was better than anything else I could come up with at the moment, it still was very GIS-y, which is okay, but this was not an audience that you wanted to have to train or to even understand how to use GIS maps, for example. But there are definite limitations. I will say there are things that also emerged that I discovered by accident, and I blinked and I thought, wait, you can do that, including that little button that all of a sudden appeared that said only do this when something's filtered, meaning when something somewhere else has been clicked on. How do you, or then display that information? And that's actually become a really powerful way to use it. So, Robert?
Yeah, you mentioned arcade, and I've just recently built one for our geoscience department. They have a rock specimen, and they were building it in Access. And I thought, you know, a dashboard might work for this because it's basically once you click on those objects, it's a filtering thing. And then also, you know, there's a location where the past professors have grabbed this specimen, you know, where was the rock outcrop and that sort of thing. So I built that and they really liked it. The problem is I can't seem to get over that initial, I mean, what's that curve they call it? Like you get really good at, you get good at the very introductory stuff and then you get stuck in that little valley. I'm stuck there because I can't find a good way to learn arcade. There's really, it's like you go to the Esri site, you know, I've tried a couple of those asynchronous kind of tutorials and you just don't have a lot. Like it's just, I don't really, I don't know. How did you learn it? Like where did you grab the code from? You know, I'm just really struggling to find, I can't even find a good book on it, honestly. Because I saw that they had a MOOC. I didn't see it till it was already advertised and gone. I was like, oops, I guess I should have gone to that. But I was, you know, is there a website or a book that you would recommend?
Yeah, so if I was doing the job I'm supposed to be doing, right, which is taking the technology and teaching the people of New Hampshire, then I might offer a basic arcade class myself. But it was a giant struggle because of just what you said. And I would say the things that worked the best was an enormous amount of trial and error, which most people wouldn't go through, but was sort of focused on making it work. And also I had the, you know, somewhat luxury in my job to be able to do that. The other thing was that I did find useful is there were some blog posts where they went into very specifically ideas about how you might be able to use arcade. And then they would point you to story maps where they let you save a version of the story map and then make it yours, and then you could edit it. And I would say that helps somewhat, except the versions that they show, they're like, yes, and you can also do this, and there's this icon, and it uses CSS and HTML. I'm like, just like the little thing, like how do you change the color of the fonts? Please, can you show me how to do that? So it was between those blog posts and the story maps, I was able at least to figure out eventually how to do that. One of the big things that was a giant problem and I spent a ton of time on is I couldn't figure out, it would only show one of my expressions. Like basically you create an expression that says, if this is happening, do this. But no matter what I did, it would only show the first one. And I spent tons of time like pasting it, copying it, moving it. It turned out you just need to put a semicolon in the right place. Because then it would say like, oh, by the way, there's another one. You should pay attention to that one too. But the amount of time it took me to figure that out was something that was probably not many other people would have spent that time to do it. But it is supposed to be one of my jobs. An extension is supposed to be sort of a translator from the technology that exists to the people who might use it in New Hampshire, which I have to admit in my job, I have not done a great job recently with GIS professionals. And part of it is I've been so focused on story maps and ArcGIS Online and how many people could use it that I haven't really spent time. And people would say, I need a class on Python. I will never do that. I can't. But I have been sort of sucked down this dashboards arcade path. Is it a smart choice? Like, is it the most strategic choice? Probably not, but I saw a need for it. And I feel now that I know enough that I could potentially start teaching. And we started doing online workshops like April 2019. I was sitting in front of my computer talking to people. I'm like, oh, if another 10 people joined online, so be it. And now they're pretty much all online. So I think that there's lots of ways that could be done, but you're right that I always used to say there should be like the ArcGIS or ArcMap for Dummies button, where you could just click it and it would hide like 87% of the functions and just give you some basics. This is the main things you need. I don't care about 7 layers of symbology. Make the one easier, right? So in some ways, maybe, oh boy, are you trying to, am I convincing myself to do like an arcades, just color some basic things class? But yeah, that is the struggle that Tim was talking about. And also who does that and what role could other people play? And does everybody have that amount of time that they would go down the rabbit hole? And this is one tiny like area, right? How do I color something inside of this map so it looks more appealing? Sometimes takes you much longer than you would expect. Although now that I know how to do it, maybe I could teach other people and also be able to, like every dashboard that I have now, I'm like, haha, now I can color the text in the list, or I can do that, or, but it is, I agree, it is incredibly difficult to get the basics, especially if you don't have any experience coding. And I have like that much coding experience, but I see Katie and Andy have had their hands up for quite a while.
I was going to change away from this current discussion. So I don't know if Andy had something to add to this current topic.
Yes, actually, I was going to say that one of the great things about the last 10, 20 years is that so many platforms let you get the basics in place on the web relatively easily. And what I'm starting to see more of, and what you're describing, Shane, is that they also have the ability to go in and tweak so much of the stuff behind the scenes. So you can do that with WordPress and other platforms. But that tells me that there's still a need for people to learn some HTML and some CSS and some JavaScript to be able to do these things. It's still, you know, they're not building the things from scratch, but they still need to be able to go in and do this tweaking. So I think that that's continues to be a worthwhile thing, probably something to teach in place as part of a class on, you know, doing some of this, as opposed to, here, come and learn JavaScript and then come back later to work on your map. That's probably not going to work well, but for most students, but that's there. Actually, I just want to follow up. One other thing I wanted to mention from that last session with the previous session regarding story maps is, you probably all know this, that students can take their story maps and move them into their own private personal space, right? So they can take it with them. So I'll make sure people know to tell their students they can take them away with them from college.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because I mean, when ArcGIS Online is now officially supported by our academic technologies group, although they don't know how to use GIS, but I told them, you better be ready when people leave the university. They're going to want, now that you give them accounts, that's wonderful, but be ready when people say, I want to have this with me afterwards, because it's not a trivial thing if people spend all this time and energy working on their projects to want them to be not trapped inside of their UNH account. Yeah. And I will just say that all these dashboards could have existed without the coding, right? And the beauty is that I was able to do so much without having to know any coding. It's just that when people said, for example, in a map of dashboard I didn't show, the size of the land. So I used one of Granite's data layers to look at town-owned lands, because the BioBlitz was from town-owned lands. They said, can you make a town-owned lands mapper? Like, sure, I can do that. And they're like, wow, the size of the town lands is negative 999 acres. Great. That's going to make a lot of sense to people. Like, well, that's what the database shows. Like, I can't influence that. And they're like, but could you? Wouldn't it be great if it said no size reported instead of negative 999 in the list?
I remember that.
And I was like, oh boy, I'm finally going to have to learn Arcade. Because if you know Arcade, that's a piece of cake, right? When this says this, instead put here. And that was all of a sudden, instead of it just looking cute and having a different color, it was very much focused on how do I solve this problem that I can't get around? Like, here's all the things I could get around without knowing coding. And now here is some glaring problem that will make this less useful for the intended audience. And then it became the behind the scenes tweaking was necessary for that. Although the vast majority of the thing itself, you didn't need any coding experience at all to build. So that was it became a little tweak, but that tweak in this case, especially to the people who wanted me to make it, was really important. So, okay, go ahead, Katie.
I was curious, I love that you brought up that tip of using the experience builder as a wrapper for the ability to have your dashboard be both a desktop and a mobile. It's a great suggestion. It's something that I think Tom Schwartzman from Esri tipped me up for that. But one thing that I'm still struggling with is I'm trying to work with URL parameters in my dashboard because I constantly get people who always want to be able to send a link to one point on the map. Like they want a link to this particular library. And you can do that in a lot of the maps and apps, but can you do that in a dashboard? And then what happens when you put that into the experience builder and use that hack to get your mobile view? Then what happens to the URL parameters? I know we're getting in the weeds now, but has anybody played with any of that?
Yeah, I have actually. Does anybody else have any? Well, first of all, I want to make sure everybody understands what you just said, because I think that probably not everybody understood that. But so the interesting thing about dashboards, and you can think about this from, I want to send it to this library, or this very tangibly in that Bloom Watch. So that app where you say, here's a cyanobacteria bloom, I'm taking a picture of it and submitting it now. Wouldn't it be nice if you could click a link and then go and see the bloom you just submitted right in the dashboard itself? Like zoom down to the location, see the picture you just took showing up in the dashboard. And how you would do that is dashboards have the ability to configure these things called URL parameters, where you could say, yes, I would like people to be able to send a URL that not only has the dashboard, but also has the lat long. And I want my dashboard to be smart enough that if somebody sends a URL that has that, it's not only going to open the dashboard, but it's going to zoom right down to that location of that point. Or what if I wanted people only to see food discounts on the dashboard and ignore the food access one, ignore all the other ones? So basically you can pre-select things in the dashboard. You can set it up so that it expects those, and you can have people be able to have smart links that they send to people that will not create a new version of the dashboard, but will send them to the dashboard and then pre-configure or configure on the fly how you want that dashboard to look for that person. So it doesn't work yet, but I did set up that URL stream for the app developer to work on, and we tried it. Like the good thing about this is you can try it by just creating the URL you think should work and just trying it and loading it, and it worked fine. When we gave it the lat long, it zoomed right down to it exactly how we wanted it to go. So that's what he's going to do, is have the app have a button that says, show me my point on the map, and it's going to load the dashboard and zoom down to that point.
Are you using the lat long? Is that grabbing the current GPS location, or are those lat long in the attributes?
It's lat long from the app, because the app stores it, and then it's going to just send the lat long. But here's the question. The problem is that you just said, if it's inside of an experience builder, you can't send that, because I don't think the experience builder can translate it. So what we're doing, fortunately for us, we have an end around, which is people are using the app on their mobile phone. So we're just going to send it to the mobile version of the dashboard. because we don't want people to look at the main dashboard on their phone because it would look terrible and the experience builder would switch to the mobile one anyway. So in the app, this is a very nice little cheat because it's a specific use. On the app, when you click, we're sending it just to the mobile dashboard. We're not sending it to the experience builder because we don't need to. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That's a good tip.
But
Thank you.
we are lucky in that we know for a fact that everybody using that app is only going to be on a mobile phone. Could you do the same thing and send it to an experience builder? I don't know that you could. So that trick, I think, of my little wrap in the experience builder, it all looks good if you're trying to send that information in to pre-configure the dashboard. It might be difficult to do. But here's another cool thing to consider with dashboards that you can use these URL parameters. What if you wanted a dashboard in a story map? And as you went to different sections of the story map, the dashboard that was displayed looked different depending on what section of the story map you were in. When you embed that story map or that dashboard in the story map, instead of just embedding the URL of the dashboard, you could embed the fancy URL of the dashboard that automatically like zoomed in or pre-configured the dashboard to look the way that you wanted it to look.
It would be very cool if when you did that, it focused towards the center of your dashboard, the thing that was being highlighted in the section of your story map.
So using URL parameters, you could do that. I think. I don't see why you
That's pretty cool idea.
Of course, the dashboard would still be itself. You could still flip around, turn things on and off, but you could see as you're going to different sections of the story map or even different pages of the experience builder, right? Or things like that, you can have that dashboard flexing and changing and displaying different things as you lead people through different areas. So I have not used that yet. I don't see why it wouldn't work, right? But I think that that would be an interesting thing to try. At some point, I hope to have a way to try that or a reason to try that specifically. So now that was very in the weeds, but we are at a GIS conference. So I know that would be a question in my classes that I would say, so can we go into a breakout room and Zoom and talk about that? Because we're not pulling the rest of the class through that. But hopefully, if there's any maybe audience that might not have been a complete intimidation factor for, hopefully it was this audience, although it still is a lot. I would not have been able to answer that question or say any of those things like a month ago, because it was really based on that idea. But then again, it became a solution to a problem. And how do you actually have the dashboard pre-configured? Because people want that. I don't want to send people to the dashboard and say, all right, go here, zoom here, click this. What can I just send them a link? And then when you click on it, that automatically pre-configures the dashboard to look the way that I want it to look. And that is what those URL parameters are designed to do. I will say that the link that we sent in the end was not very complicated. It was just knowing, like, again, where to put the commas in order to get the URL to show up, or it to understand. I wonder if I can even find it. No, probably not. To get the dashboard to correctly read that information. So we're getting towards the end of everybody's probably ability to focus, and also the end of what was supposed to be the topic. I will just wanted to show one quick thing, because we don't have, obviously I could talk for a long time about these, but just wanted to show one example of Arcade because people mentioned it. Let me see if I can open one up quickly. Just one example of one of the uses of Arcade. Copy. Let me do this. Note. Paste. Control formats. All right, I'll just do this quickly. Assuming that it's still going to work. Share screen. So this is the way that the code works. like figuring out how to do this was one thing and figuring out how to chain them together was another. But this, they do have little builders in there. But this just says, if this thing says no bloom present, my color should be this. If this thing says between a football field and a tennis court, my color should be this. And so it's just this little sequence of saying, hey, if the attribute says this, I want the color to be this. If the attribute says this, I want the color to be this. And this is a similar thing. If it says no bloom present, I want the text to be no bloom observed. If it says between this, I want it to say bloom reported.
Shane, I'm just going to jump in here while you're illustrating this to say, in all of those classes, nobody bothers to do what you just did. And for somebody who doesn't know any code, what you did is almost enough to make it clear what you would change. It's not, you know, you just made something that otherwise looks like gibberish quite clear. And I don't know why any of those MOOCs or any of those classes or even those instructions never do that.
Well, thank you.
Because it's, what I'm saying is you pointed out what the separate pieces are, right? What is the thing that you change versus the command to do it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And they don't do that. And if you are not a person who has ever taken a coding class in your life, it's just a bunch of symbols up there.
Yep. No, I mean, it looks so, not that this is intensely straightforward, but now when I look back at it, I'm like, huh, it kind of makes sense. But, and then, yeah, to figure this out was a long, painful process. And then you're just saying, okay, this thing is my color, bloom text, bloom size. So there's 3 different things you're defining. Here's the colors, here's the text, here's the size. And then believe it or not, this is it down here. That says use these for the text color. And when I put bloom status, take the stuff from here. And when I put bloom text, take the stuff from here. Guys, I'm still on for another half an hour.
Sorry.
It's okay, no worries.
We're done being outside. Bye.
Okay, bye. It's not a cat, but so I mean this.
That's so big.
What? Yeah, he's 12 now, so. In any case, this, like, I could easily copy and paste this, I even can, and this, again, for Slack might be a good place, but if you know this and how to structure that, and you can figure out this thing down here, all you have to do inside of your dashboard, oops, wrong one, inside of the dashboard is in your list, put this thing that says expression / bloom status, expression / bloom text, and it just automatically displays the results of those things. So I know that looks easy. It's not that difficult, but it sounds like I need to teach a class on this, or at least put a blog post together that's from like my point of view. The cool thing is if you want to change it, it automatically shows you if it worked or not in this dialogue. So if nothing else, it does give you a quick check on reality as to whether or not, but you don't know how many times I fought about, well, should I have this bracket or not, or 2 brackets, or yeah, it's tough. But this is, it is, to me, it's exciting that even though it's coding, it's in the grand scheme of coding, it's not tremendously difficult, but I know how long it took me to figure this out. If you can do this once though, you can do it on any dashboard and it's pretty straightforward. And it's not as fancy as some of their other options, but the idea that on that dashboard, the color shows up, or even it says no bloom observed or bloom reported, makes it easier for people to use. And it lets you go around just, like I had this little field that said bloom size, no bloom present. Like why? Why does it say bloom size if no bloom is present? Should it just say no bloom observed? That's what it should say, because that makes sense to other people, not to just to GIS folks. But so it's the next level of make sure your legend makes sense to somebody who doesn't know anything about your GIS data, right? It's the next level of that. Okay, you've inspired me. Now I'm gonna have to do a blog post or send that around or do some sort of like, maybe I just do 20-minute trainings for So you want your color font to be a different color. How do you get rid of negative
Well-
999 in your data on your list on your dashboard?
Or Shane, even just start with how do you omit null values? Like if you have an attribute and only 50% of them are populated, how do you only show when it's not null?
Mhm.
Because that one is just like, really, I use that one all the time and it's literally one line of Arcade.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, so it sounds like you'll be the co-presenter then, Katie. That's what I just heard. Everybody heard that, right? It's being recorded too. I haven't stopped the recording yet, so you're on record now.
Perfect.
All right, I am